afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City of Rockville's first conversation surrounding Juneteenth and all the issues that we've been very much faced with over the past 400 years, but most specifically in the last 15 months. As I said recently, one cannot unsee what your eyes have seen. And I think the events of May 25th and June 1st a year ago have really given us an opportunity to have some very difficult conversations. And on behalf of the Mayor and Council of the city, I want to thank our staff for giving us this chance to have a panel discussion. Topic is Juneteenth, but I think it will stretch into some other areas in which we all really want to acknowledge and see how we can lead the city forward in better ways. So with that, I will turn it over to Naomi for some introductions and a run of show. So welcome, thank you all for being here.
Hey, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Naomi Powell, the Program Coordinator for the City of Rockville's Department of Housing and Community Development. And on behalf of the City of Rockville and the Mayor and Council, welcome to our inaugural Juneteenth celebration as we celebrate the power of now. June 19th commemorates the anniversary date of the announcement proclaiming freedom from slavery in Texas, as emancipation came at different times throughout the southern states. Many states now celebrate Juneteenth, or Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Liberation Day, and Emancipation Day on June 19th. And while that moment in time served as the formal end of slavery in Texas and earlier in other parts of the country, the struggle for Blacks in America to be treated equitably continues. Calls for racial equity and social justice persist, and that call is getting louder. Progress is being made, but there is still a ways to go. And the City of Rockville wants to be part of the change that needs to happen, and that is already happening. That is why Rockville's Mayor and Council took a bold step to show that we are all in this together and unanimously voted to declare June 19th a city holiday. Rockville 11's Kathy Dantzler tells us about this historic Rockville moment.
The Rockville Mayor and Council make a move to show that Rockville is a place that values all cultures that make up our great city. On Monday, July 20th, 2020, the Mayor and Council unanimously voted to recognize Juneteenth as a city holiday beginning in 2021.
And all those in favor of this resolution, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you all.
Juneteenth, a blending of the words June and 19th, is the oldest known U.S. celebration of the end of slavery. And while America recognizes Independence Day as July 4th, 1776, it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that enslaved Blacks in America received their independence. On that day, the Union Major General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, and told enslaved Blacks they were free. 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And just like the American flag, the Juneteenth flag echoes the colors red, white, and blue to symbolize that enslaved Blacks and their descendants are American. And the star in the middle of the flag pays homage to Texas, while the bursting new star on the horizon of the red and blue fields represents a new freedom and a new people. Fast forward to 2020, and the nation continues to deal with racial inequalities as it pertains to Blacks in America. Following the tragic murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the nation experienced an awakening, and a movement was reignited to demand the acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter in America. Rockville's Mayor and Council took a stand with that movement to make sure that the city stays on the right side of history when it comes to racial and social injustice. And adding to that, the unanimous vote to declare Juneteenth as an official city holiday continues Rockville's mission to create a city that is inclusive and welcomes and values all races and cultures. And while Juneteenth has been a state holiday in Maryland since 2014, it was only commemorative. Rockville now becomes part of a growing list of cities recognizing this day of freedom for Blacks in America. The Mayor and Council had an open and honest dialogue about how Juneteenth should and will be celebrated in Rockville. And you can hear that discussion by heading to the City of Rockville's YouTube channel. Ultimately, Juneteenth in Rockville will be much more than just another day off. It will serve as a day of education of the Black culture and a chance to promote racial equality. For Rockville 11, I'm Kathy Dantzler.
And in keeping with the Mayor and Council's promise to make Rockville's Juneteenth celebration more than a day off, we are using the power of now to have an open and honest discussion about ways we as a community can work together to achieve racial equity and further social justice. Joining us today from the Rockville Mayor and Council are Mayor Bridget Donnell-Newton, Councilmember Monique Ashton, Councilmember Beryl L. Feinberg. Hopefully Councilmember David Miles will also join us. And also joining in our discussion today are John Hale, President of the Cornerstone Group, Nancy Picard, Executive Director of Peerless Rockville, and Cindy Rivard, from the CEO of Rockville Economic Development Incorporated, also known as READY. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Let's get into it. And so let's begin with talking about June 19th and how it isn't recognized as a federal holiday, and in some states only as a ceremonial holiday. Maryland is among the 47 states and the District of Columbia that recognize Juneteenth, at least ceremonially, and is on track to join only 4 other states in recognizing Juneteenth as an official paid holiday for state employees. By unanimous vote on July 17, 2020, Rockville joined several other cities in declaring Juneteenth as a formal city holiday. And so I would like to pose this question to the Mayor and Council, starting with Mayor Newton. Why was it important to all of you to make Juneteenth a city holiday?
Thanks, Niambi. I think it was important for all of us because as the city of Rockville is one of, if not the most diverse city, we'll argue that with some others along the way, but we value that diversity. We value the leadership role that the city has played in many, many ways. And I think honoring this day and encouraging our community to come together and very much learn. As a former history major, I am shocked that I did not know about Greenwood and Tulsa. 63 years old, and it wasn't until about a year or so ago that I heard about it and have done more reading. And yesterday being the 100th anniversary, you know, today's paper and yesterday's paper are catching up on stories and articles, not stories, but articles about it. I think it's giving us an opportunity to have, as you mentioned in your opening, the difficult conversations. And I'm thrilled that the city is not only taking the day as a paid holiday, but encouraging people to get involved, to be engaged, and to do community service, SSL hours for students and whatnot. That's what it's all about. It's not about, you know, really going shopping and having a free day. It's about using that time to educate ourselves and get better as people, as humans. And one thing I did want to mention, Councilmember Perchela had an unavoidable family situation arise, and he would be here also if that hadn't happened. So I wanted to let you all know that.
Thank you, Mayor Newton. And so Councilmember Ashton or Councilmember Feinberg, would you also like to comment? Why was this important?
Thank you, Niambi. This is Beryl Feinberg. I think American history is complicated. Celebrating Juneteenth is one of the several actions which debunk the long-held myth of our country and whitewashed history, so that hopefully one day we the people may truly be actualized as all people are created equal. I too can share, as with the mayor, growing up in northern New Jersey, schools didn't feature any of the aspects of African American history. I was never taught about Sojourner Truth, Josiah Henson, Ida B. Wells, any African American who are notable for achievements in the arts and sciences and literatures. And like so many other school children, African American history was barely acknowledged. Shamefully, my history books and school lessons were silent on the contributions of African Americans to this country. This created a sense of invisibility and marginalized an entire people. And this is an opportunity for us, all of us, to learn and relearn their history of enslavement, oppression, systematic racism that continues in contemporary society. And I will certainly defer and also want to let my colleagues speak, so I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Feinberg. And I see Councilmember Miles has been able to join us. Welcome to you. Thank you for being here as well. Councilmember Ashton?
Yes, thank you. And thank
Would you
you.
like to comment?
Yes. Thank you for planning this and just providing this space to have more diverse opportunities. I've always appreciated what we've done as a city, but I know there's room for more. And in my opinion, African American history and the Black diaspora history, it's all a part of American history. And we had a really good discussion on historic preservation in our city just yesterday. And oftentimes, history is looked at through the lens of pure colonialism with one lens. And Juneteenth, to me, is not only an important national opportunity to commemorate the end of slavery and the deep systematic oppression that has occurred in this country over the past 400 plus years. It's a chance to celebrate also resilience that we see in our community. It's a chance for people who are from diverse communities to see that there's important roles that we've all played in this country, and it's a chance to tell that story. So I have known about Juneteenth and celebrated it for a very long time. There are many celebrations, stories, foods that are eaten. But I really think that this moment in time, what has occurred over the past year in our country is a new awakening, and it's a chance for us to really get some things accomplished so that we can begin to tell the full American history. We can tell the full Rockville history, and we can truly make a place for all.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ashton. And Councilmember Miles, I'll invite you also to comment on why was this so important for the city of Rockville to establish Juneteenth as a holiday?
Yeah, echo my thanks and colleagues in organizing this panel. I apologize about showing up late, had patients that ran behind, and I take off in a little bit to see my next, but I think this is important for a variety of reasons, if for no other reason to begin a conversation similar to what we are having today. I'm humbled and proud to be a part of this body, the mayor and council, that has done some pretty historic things over the past year plus to address some of the systemic things that have kept certain individuals from realizing their full potential. There are things that you may have already mentioned. I apologize if I'm restating what has already been said before, to figure out how to keep people in their homes who might have modest means, realizing that people who are of African descent are, least likely to have or accumulated a significant amount of wealth, not income, but wealth. Other interventions to, have conversations, not just within the police department, but within our communities about eliminating bias. Bias often targeted towards people of color, and particularly in the context of Juneteenth, people of African descent. And these trainings have gone on even among city staff. A number of us on this call have participated in such trainings. But Juneteenth is, again, about beginning discussions. And, this is the start of discussions. How do we ensure public safety? We've discussed, and we'll probably be able to have somebody who's working in our police department as a mental health specialist to be able to respond to certain calls when police response might not necessarily be the best response. Recognizing how people of African descent are disproportionately, fall the victims to die in these police interactions. So I think this celebration, this commemoration is an opportunity to begin those discussions. Again, it's about emancipation and how people found out later than the Emancipation Proclamation stated that people who were enslaved in southern states were free. But it's again more symbolic of something bigger, how to address the things that have transpired since that period, and a call to action about all the work that we still need to do. So again, thanks you all. Thanks to my colleagues for being very bold and courageous on not just this commemoration, but all the things, the hard work that needs to be done to support this commemoration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Miles, and thank you to Mayor Newton and our other council members for your thoughts on this. And keeping with this topic of preserving the history of Juneteenth, I'd like to bring Nancy Picard from Peerless Rockville into the discussion. Ms. Picard, you work with an organization whose mission is to preserve Rockville's history. So can you give us your thoughts on the significance of Juneteenth and its relationship to Maryland's and Montgomery County's history with slavery?
Sure. Thank you very much, Naomi, and thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council, for inviting me here today. I am no expert on this by far, but I do have a pretty good familiarity of kind of the history here in Maryland and in Rockville and in Montgomery County, and really how it relates to this larger story historically. I wasn't sure how much that you would delve into to start us off, and that was a lovely program to begin this meeting with, which I think gave us all a baseline. And I think the question I was looking at was the thoughts on the significance of Juneteenth to Rockville. And as Juneteenth really celebrates word of emancipation, reaching those farthest reaches of enslaved individuals, I think that does resonate with our story here, although in a different way. But for Rockville, it really gives us an opportunity to continue that awakening that you've all discussed, and to really join in with the nation in a national celebration of the experience. And in doing a little research for this, one of the things I read was the National Museum of African American History and Culture. On one of their blogs, I think they had a really great statement that just talks about just emancipation and how it spread across the country. And it mentions how on Freedom's Eve, which was the eve of January 1st, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was set to go into effect, that first watch night services took place. And on that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country, awaiting the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered to all enslaved people in the Confederate States who were declared legally free. And Union soldiers went into many plantations and across cities across the South to share this word. But unfortunately, not everyone in the Confederate territory would immediately be free. And even though the Emancipation Proclamation was effective in 1863, it really could not be implemented because it applied to the rebellion states, the Confederate states. And I think that that's something that people need to understand, that it took that additional time to actually bring freedom to those people. And thus, also in Maryland, many people don't realize that because it actually applied to the states that had rebelled from the Union, and Maryland did not secede from the Union and stayed a Union state. So therefore, in Maryland, it was actually emancipation came through popular vote when the state ratified a new constitution for Maryland in 1864. Montgomery County and the Eastern Shore counties were very against. And actually the vote here, it was a strong slaveholding state. And I think that that is something that we can continue to delve into and make sure that we acknowledge that past, because it has had really repercussions going forward through the years here in the community. And I think that that's part of the reaching back that we have to do to continue with that reconciliation of that. And one other thing, I do want to say that November 1st is considered Emancipation Day here in Maryland. And that is another day that we get to celebrate. So with this celebration, we will be able to join with the nation on Juneteenth and still commemorate November 1st as our local story of emancipation.
Thank you, Ms. Picard. And we certainly appreciate the intensive and wonderful work that Peerless Rockville is doing to document the African American history in the state, in the county, and in the city of Rockville in particular. And we know that the city of Rockville has an African American heritage walking tour. Can you speak on the need to continue to document and build on such an important city asset as the African American heritage walking tour here in Rockville?
Yes, I think that there are still many opportunities to delve further into that history. I think unfortunately for many years, as you've all discussed, it just was not studied and it wasn't promoted. And also, I think the information was a little bit more difficult for people to get to. One area that I think definitely could use further documenting here in the city is just the whole civil rights era. We don't really think about, or we don't really share, I don't think, enough about what happened here in the mid-century, the mid-20th century, and how divided everything still was, and the limitations on the African American community all the way up through the middle of the century. And we do still feel those effects today. And that said, there were wonderful and amazing things that were occurring in the African American communities, and through a lot of grit and determination, the stories of former enslaved, their families, persevered to really grow and work hard to educate their children and build communities. And many of those communities exist today as a testament to the earlier generations. And I think that we can continue to work on celebrating that. I believe that stories of civil unrest and things that happened in Rockville, I think of the Gibbs story. I think of integration of communities, and many forward-thinking individuals in Lincoln Park that just did what they could to grow the culture. And as Councilmember Ashton mentioned, we had a conversation about this just last night, talking about how even in historic preservation, we can do more to build a culture of diversity, inclusion, and equity. But we do need the research, and I think we need to pour the resources into research, designation, and recognition to get even further with those stories.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Ms. Picard. So again, it's interesting that June 19th, 1865 marks the day that enslaved people in Galveston, Texas learned that they were legally free, nearly 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And while Blacks across the country were given their freedom, equity was and continues to be a challenge due to the residues of racism, as many of you have alluded to. And it's important, that we understand racism as fundamentally a system of advantage where some are privileged and others are marginalized based on their race. And this system permeates every aspect of life and allows for the perpetuation of interpersonal racial bias. And the system itself thereby becomes self-sustaining. And this is not easy to talk about. And yet, Rockville has held discussions on racial equity and social justice in its mayor and council meetings regularly. And so my next questions are again to the mayor and council members. How important is it that elected officials have these types of conversations in a public forum, such as the mayor and council meetings? And Councilmember Miles started to touch on this a bit, but what are some of the specific steps that the city has taken so far towards realizing racial equity and furthering social justice within the Rockville community? And again, I'll start with you, Mayor Newton.
Thank you. Well, I think it's super important that we have them in public, and I think it's also difficult, as Councilmember Dr. Miles mentioned, but The steps that we've taken, I think, have been bold. We have more to do, but we have given the city manager the authority in his budget to hire a full-time individual under the city manager's department to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, and help spread that throughout the city departments, not just in the city manager or the mayor and council. We have hired we've partnered with the county for the police mental health specialists to help our police 24/7. Rather than bring a person in individually right now, we're going to use the resources at the county level and hope that that not only supports and helps what we're trying to do, but maybe down the line we will be able to hire somebody full-time across 3 different whatever they're called segments of the day. Yeah, as we know, police are 24/7. You can't have one person work 24/7, 7 days a week. What else have we done? I'm going to reach out to my council members to help me here. Obviously, this Juneteenth acknowledgement, celebration, giving the day, as well as this conversation today, is starting other things that I think we will continue these conversations. As has been mentioned, we started last night in our conversation about historic resources. I didn't live here in the 60s when urban renewal came through Rockville, but we demolished a significant portion of the African-American community resources, not people, but resources, and moved people out and took away business opportunities. And I think that's had a long-standing effect. We've had some zoning changes that we've needed to be made. I know in certain places, and I know this personally, there were covenants on housing deeds that said could not be sold to a person of color. Shocking to me in this generation that we're in right now that those would still be on, but I think that is something that people need to be intentional about. If you find that on your house deed, it takes a lot of work, as I do know, but you got to get it off. So council members, I want to reach out and invite you into this. What else are we doing?
So I think we've done some other facets that permeates our entire city governance. And one was we initiated a review of all of our recruitment practices and all stages of the recruitment. We have made sure intentionally that we advertise for positions in an array of media that is targeted to talented staff with diverse backgrounds. We've also made sure that our policies on racial equity are part of all components of the recruitment process, from interview panels to the types of questions that we ask during interviews and how we appraise those responses to the interviews, so that we make sure that the people that we are serving and the staff that are providing those services represent the community at large. We have to ensure that the diversity of our population is represented in our staff. And until we get to that point, where there is a lot more that we need to do. Additionally, we created several years ago to make sure that everyone has a bite of the pie, so to speak, and economic opportunity in providing goods and services to this city. We created a minority female disabled procurement program that does not have quotas. It is a program of technical assistance, of outreach, of education, making sure that we are all aware of the opportunities of everyone, both within the city and outside of the city, to provide an array of services. And that has proved successful through a variety of methods, including attendance at trade associations, professional associations, procurement fairs, and sharing that everyone is welcome to provide goods and services to our residents in the city. The other is that we advocated as a body, unanimously agreeing to recommend the abolishment of the racist song, Maryland, My Maryland. And we advocated both to our District 17 delegation, to our governor, and to the state House and Senate leadership. And thankfully, that was approved in the most recent legislative session. And so that song has been repealed. And lastly, making this a celebration. That's another aspect that we have done, as has been mentioned by others.
This is Monique Ashton. Thank you, my colleagues, for doing all the hard work of the list there. I did want to go back to Rockville's place in history. Just a quick moment. I think some folks have heard about the Underground Railroad, and it's something that I studied very early on and has been an inspiration to me in my life, just the many stories and the bravery that folks who had the courage to try and seek a better life when there were so many efforts to oppress them. And the Underground Railroad is a secret network of volunteers and people who were previously enslaved who had been freed to help and others escape and find freedom. And I had looked at Harriet Tubman as a role model for a long time in my life, and to come back to Rockville and to realize that not only did Maryland and Montgomery County serve as an active role in it, but Rockville also had a station. And so I don't know how many people in our community know about that, but that is a source of tremendous pride. There's so many stories of folks who, in spite of, still sought and tried to help others and to show that resilience. And so I just wanted to make sure to mention that, given that we're talking about our history. But why are we doing this and what are we doing as a city? I think we have taken important steps over the past year. It started out with our statements, but we had to follow up our statements with action. I do feel the statements and the resolutions we're going to be working on some more in the future are important because we assume that everyone has the same baseline, and it's important for all of us to help understand our history more fully. And to those of us who know, to help others understand and to be patient and to push still to create more awareness. But when it comes to action, there are so many things when you look back at our history that have set us up for where we are today. And whether that's poverty, whether that's health disparities, whether that's housing types and zoning, whether it's, our neighbors are really literally split up by railroads or highways, whether it's financial disparities as well. All of that is a result of our history and how some people had access and some people didn't. And so we as leaders are charged with helping to really not just say we're diverse, but to create a more inclusive society. And as my colleagues have mentioned, we are creating a whole social justice planning effort because we didn't just want to make a statement. We wanted to look very deeply at who we are, where we've been, and what we can do to help write the future. We also created the Community Policing Advisory Board. Our police department has been working to really make sure that we have a culture of community policing, that we change the historical dynamic and really look at how do we develop partnerships and work together and have fair and impartial policing, and they've been working with other jurisdictions to also be a part of some of those trainings. So that is, how do you create change inside out and outside in? In addition to the mental health support that we're going to be offering to help respond to crises, as well as to support our officers, we looked at and advocated for, even though that we don't control that part, it's the county, looking at our schools. And it was really wonderful to see that work being done. We were able to document and see, and working with our principals, that there are some communities where people are not getting the same experience. And perhaps we were hearing reports of double the rates of social work visits and potential issues of self-harm, just because of some of the trauma that some communities were experiencing. And our city staff have been working to help provide social work services so that we can help give our children the best start. We also created the housing and community development group so that we can put a focus on affordable workforce housing, and that we could really look at how we approach our communities and increase community engagement. And so, Nyambi, thank you for being a part of that group. And I also want to acknowledge Asmar Habte and our city manager who helped us to create that. We pioneered vote by mail in our area, increasing access to something so basic as the ability to vote, and how do you get more people involved. Those are some things that we have started. We've also been talking about trying to increase diversity on our boards and commissions, really changing our community outreach. So with the new diversity position, we're looking at, do we need to be thinking about how we do outreach in the non-traditional ways to reach people who we're not currently talking to, and also thinking about linguistic competency. And also just thinking about zoning as well. So we're going through an entire comprehensive plan. How can we promote ways that are more inclusive in our city, housing-wise, economic development-wise, et cetera. So we're taking a very, very holistic approach at all aspects of life and seeing how we can make a difference for the future.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ashton. Clearly, Rockville, again, is ready to be part of the change and be a leader in these issues to the best of our abilities. Is there anything you want to add to that, Councilmember Miles?
Thanks. I thank my colleagues for outlining the broad swath of initiatives that have occurred. Speaking to your question about why is it important to have this discussion, I think the mayor started by, addressing some of the historic things that have occurred in this city. For example, there's one of the 3 known lynchings in Montgomery County is thought to have occurred in Rockville, I believe in the area of Julius West Middle School present day. There's a group who's working to bring the monument that's currently in Alabama here to commemorate that, so that it won't be forgotten. I certainly tip my hat to my Jewish brothers and sisters who have done a great job in making people never forget that I think these things are important. Even present day, there are people who are trying to forget what happened on January 6th of this year. And it's important to have these discussions, to have it in the public record so that people do not forget. Madam Mayor also discussed, some of the historic neighborhoods like Hayti, where kind of Martin's Lane, where the current swim center and skateboard park is. It's a thriving African-American community. There's currently still a cemetery there. And for a while, the only place that African-Americans were allowed to live in Rockville was in Lincoln Park. And as we think about changing some of the things that, as we think about developing, as to allude to some of the things that both Councilmember Feinberg and Ashton mentioned, we have to be mindful that there are still historic or families that despite all the odds, have managed to retain some property, and making sure that they're not pushed out or squeezed out financially as we look to bring more people, make more neighbors into the city. And then for those who have lost land, property, or others, like how do you begin to have discussions? How do you address that? People who've lost lives here, for example. So I think, again, having these discussions provides a starting point to be able to discuss that. I think, as I've previously mentioned, a lot of the focus over the past year has certainly been focused on police, and particularly in other jurisdictions, and for obvious reasons. We are blessed. Our police chief has been at the forefront of implementing what's called fair and impartial policing. Was doing that prior to the murder of George Floyd, and has continued to do so. I think he'd like to state 2 things that I'll be probably misquoting him, that you train dogs, you have to educate people, and he's making this an ongoing educational effort with both the police department as well as the community. And then the second thing that he would often mention is that you can, if you're static, if you're not making progress, you're falling behind. So we have to continue to push. But it's, again, not just the police department. Again, I discussed briefly that city staff have undergone a similar sort of implicit bias training, and those trainings are ongoing as well. Councilmember Feinberg also addressed some of the hiring practices within, and then how we contract outside. But this is all in part so that we can lead by example. Because when I think about, when we think of, for example, about the death of George Floyd, all that was sparked because of a call about a potentially counterfeit $20 bill. So how do we educate our neighbors to be able to have discussions? What if instead the cashier asks, like, is this a counterfeit $20 bill? What if instead some of our neighbors, instead of calling 911, actually have discussions with people? So this is all a way for us to lead by example, showing that we ourselves are dealing with our biases. We're working through them. I have my own biases, right? As an example, one of the movements that hasn't been getting a lot of credence is like the effects that, or the disproportionate, sorry, I can't call, death, harassment of people transgender, and having to learn, how to use pronouns appropriately, how to address families who come in. So, for example, I'm a pediatrician. If they're two parents of the same gender, how do you have these discussions with parents and children to put everybody at ease, to make everybody feel wanted and that their personhood is esteemed. So we have to do this as a community as well. So we want to lead by example, both within the police, city staff, mayor, and council, but in a manner to have larger discussions with our neighbors. We are blessed to have some relatively educated members in this city throughout, just proportionately. So leveraging that, teaching folks, and then having these conversations so that we can certainly make this a place where everybody can thrive. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Miles. And I do want to just reflect that back to our mayor and council. As you said, Dr. Moss, that the mayor and council's willingness to have these difficult conversations and to continue to have them, and and figure out what the city can do to address some of the issues is a model, right? It sets the tone for city staff and again for the rest of the community, so that we are in conversation with our neighbors about how we can make things better. So that is appreciated, and it's very important. And so I'd like to now take a look at where the public and private sector meet and talk about economic development when it comes to supporting and recruiting Black-owned businesses here in our area. And this is where I'd first like to bring in the CEO of Rockville Economic Incorporated, or READY, Cindy Rivard. And Ms. Rivard, can you talk about some of the programs that READY offers that can support Black businesses that are interested in relocating or launching their companies here in Rockville?
Yes, thank you, Nambi. Rockville has done an awful lot to help business. I think it's really commendable that the city has had a great focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, and supporting people who have a dream in figuring out how to put that into action. The Maryland Women's Business Center has been a featured program at READY for over 10 years now. It's an SBA supported program. I know Mr. Hale will probably talk a little bit more about the support of the Small Business Administration and how important that is to our overall national community. But small businesses really are the major area where people have their living, have jobs, while there are many, many larger corporations, and many of them are in Rockville, which is wonderful. The small business network and infrastructure is really inherent to the American economy. So it's really important that everybody be able to participate in that and everybody have the opportunity. The Small Business Administration funds a lot of programs that provide education and support for people who want to start businesses. And in particular, the Maryland Women's Business Center and the Women Business Center Network has a focus on partnering with historically Black colleges and universities to make sure that the information is available to people, that we are connecting in with students and faculty members who might have an idea that they want to incubate or try to set up a business to do. We also help businesses get certified to be a minority or a female-owned business so that they can be competitive in the procurement opportunities at all levels of government. We provide free workshops on a variety of topics, from financial literacy, how to set up your business plan, how to do a marketing plan, how to use social media, how to reach your customer base. Through the pandemic, a lot of our businesses were very challenged, obviously because a number of models had to shut down, had to readjust their service or product delivery. We particularly focused on helping childcare businesses. That's a very female-oriented business ownership model. And we had about 800 of the family-owned businesses, childcare businesses in our county that needed support. We found out as those businesses tried to apply for the governmental aid that many of them did not have their books set up in a way that they could access that aid. They commingled, personal and business finances. They didn't have a clear sense of distinction. So we've worked, hours and hours and hours this year, helping set up those understanding for those businesses so that they can access the aid. We set up workshops and seminars in particular for childcare businesses that are both in Spanish and English. A good number of the businesses are only Spanish speaking. It's an interesting business. It's a way for somebody who's new to our country to create a job and almost immediately take care of other people's children. It's something that people, around the globe know how to do, and it's a need that's everywhere. So a lot of the business owners are immigrants or new to our country, and navigating not only the finances, but also the culture and the language, and just figuring out all of those obstacles. And so that's what we help people do. We have another really wonderful program called Retail Incubator. It's Shop Local. The city partnered with Federal Realty and Ready to create this incubator. Again, most of the vendors are women-owned businesses who have developed a product, and we've been helping the vendors understand what it means to run a store in a brick and mortar location, how you interact with clients, how you figure out how to, set up the cable so that you can run the cash register, or I guess now it's all Square, and how to know that you're making a profit, and whether you're ready to move to taking on the additional expenses of leasing your own space. We've had 4 graduates who've gone on to their own spaces after about 2 years of our program. So that's really exciting. In addition to all of this, the City of Rockville, which supports Ready, has a number of incentive programs. One is the Small Business Impact Fund, which is geared towards helping Rockville businesses that are not chains, that are very integral to the community, sense of community in Rockville. So this fund will help businesses who give back to the community in some way bridge a financial challenge that they have so that they can stay in business and continue to support the community, whether that's needing to move online with more engagement in social media, or having a website, or the ability to sell products on the internet. Those kind of things, we can help bridge that gap. We also have the traditional type of move and expansion funds for new to market businesses that are coming here. We can help defray some of the cost of setting up a new location or expanding in a location.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, thank you so much for that. So many resources available with Ready. So thank you, Ms. Rivard. And now I want to invite you in, Mr. John Hale from the Cornerstone Group. Mr. Hale, as a business owner and with your background as a former official at the Small Business Administration, you have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with us. Can you talk about your journey to becoming a business owner and the importance of public and private engagement to support minority-owned businesses?
Mayor and City Council, for having this holiday, for Juneteenth, being recognized as a holiday for the city, that the city has often, that part of that purpose is to educate members of the city as well. And I'm real happy to be here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about public-private partnerships and then talk about my experience at the SBA, and I look forward to answering any questions as well. I am also a member of the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce. I'm a member of the board and vice chairman of FSC First, which is a CDFI and a SBA lender based in Largo, Maryland. And so that's, I think, is pertinent for that conversation as well, as we would love to work with you and some of your businesses here. Although we're based in Largo, we can service small businesses throughout the state of Maryland. And so would love to coordinate more with you and your colleagues here, just for the needs from a small business standpoint as it relates to grant and loan funding. In terms of public-private partnerships, just that engagement, really I define it as, private industry collaborating with and assisting state and local governments to execute your various missions that you have. And this can run the range from Fortune 500 companies down to small businesses that can and do on a regular basis collaborate with the public sector. For instance, in the Obama administration, I was also the Energy Department's OSBU director, and the majority of our workers are actually contract workers, up to 2/3 that worked with our large national labs, and were actually contractors and did not work for the federal government. So I think it's a great topic to have, particularly on how can all scales and sizes of businesses have a public-private partnership with the city. As much as what was discussed earlier as relates to public-private partnerships, Juneteenth was not realized until June 19th, 1865. And part of that disparity in that 2-year lack of time, which was covered earlier, was really just the access to that information that did not reach, and I'm sure in certain cases were kept from slaves who were in the, who actually did not know, that information did not cross that area of the country. And so as we think about this holiday and how to help businesses, one thing to think about is, from a public sector standpoint, how are we becoming, or how are we maintaining being forthcoming and being transparent about how we conduct our business, both in the formal and the informal ways. And oftentimes, particularly for Black business owners, reaching those decision makers can be hard to do, and it's how to navigate that process. And so there's been a couple examples. I think the mayor touched on one earlier I was going to mention about the negative aspects of public-private partnerships, and then I was going to just share from my experiences some of the positive ways that we can do this. So if you think about examples like redlining, for instance, was a practice that was actually started by the federal government. And there's a book, Crabgrass Frontier, that one of the few college books that I still kept today, that actually talked about that and is documented literally how the federal government would redline maps around certain areas of cities that you would not lend home loans, business loans into those communities, excuse me. And then urban renewal programs are often referred to as Negro removal programs, in which infrastructure projects ran right through the middle of Black communities, particularly business communities. My hometown of Detroit, Michigan, right off of downtown, Interstate 375 was run right through a Black community. Pittsburgh, where I did my graduate study, in the Hill District, the same thing. And in mentioning the 100th anniversary of the Black Wall Street and what was done there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood neighborhood, freeway was run right through there as well. So those are some very negative aspects of a public-private partnership. And also, just a point of personal privilege quickly, in Tulsa, my mother was raised in Tulsa, and in fact, and I didn't realize this until very recently, that Vernon AME Church, which was one of the specials said the last couple days of listening and reading just about the massacre, that was the only Black-owned structure that actually survived all the burning, and they built it up from the foundation. And so my grandparents joined that church in 1928. My mother was raised there, and actually my mother and father were actually married there as well. And going back and forth as a kid for family reunions and whatnot, until recently, it really just hit me just the significance of that structure and that building that I would run around when I was little in church. And until my grandfather had an amazing way of not talking to us so much as he had a nice long razor strap that hung at his house. So if you ran around too much in church, it only took me to do that once or twice, and I kind of figured out that the razor strap was a very good incentive for me not to run around in church. But those are negative examples, but I really like to hear the positive things that the city is doing, and even my work in the federal government in terms of engagement of public-private partnerships as it relates to Black businesses and the other businesses. I think three characteristics that jump to mind. One is that the leadership of the city here and other public organizations has to be personally committed and involved in that process. When the message comes from the top down, it makes a lot of difference. And that commitment has to be over a period of time, multiple years ongoing. And then secondly, that type of public-private partnership, we should have defined goals and objectives for both the public sector and for the Black-owned and the other businesses, and that both parties have to agree and understand also, here's the goals that we have, and also what does success look like? Clearly defining that up front, there's really a good flow of conversation back and forth to the party. So I think those characteristics of the public-private partnership I found have worked. Primarily, I've seen those work in the state level and the federal government level as well. And part of the question was just about the SBA and my journey. I'm a financial services background. I've been in banking, and I've restructured companies as well, mainly mid-market companies up to about $2 billion in revenue. So when I came to the administration, President Obama, he appointed me at the SBA and at the Energy Department. When I left, I really saw a deficit of entrepreneurs knowing how to sustain and to scale their businesses. And so that's what we do at the Cornerstone Group. And I think from the SBA's perspective, the programs worked really well. I think there's good infrastructure. And I've actually made a presentation at the Women's Business Center there at 51 Monroe Street, I guess a couple of years ago. And that's a really good business center. And I think what happens, and one advice for you would be that the SBA's programs are great, but they can be inconsistent because it just depends upon who the SCORE professionals are, who the professionals are in the business centers. Like any profession, some are better, more dedicated than others. So I would really closely monitor their performance and what their metrics are coming out as to how they're helping your businesses. And if you're not getting the quality of service you need from those centers and those organizations, feel free to reach out to the regional SBA leadership, and you happen to be co-located so closely to the national leadership downtown in DC as well, but to let them both know that your entrepreneurs and businesses aren't being served the way that they should. I'm not saying that they're not, but as centers change over and as leaderships change over in just all the various programs that the federal government has, to really reach out to those stakeholders and let them know you're not getting the services you need. And one thing that did surprise me in the administration is the USDA, the Agriculture Department. And I didn't realize until I started talking to some folks there that there's 13 to 15 different definitions of what rural is. I think of rural Michigan, rural Maryland, when I go out 270, et cetera. But so you may be surprised that depending on the definition of rural, there may be ones that fit for the city. And so I would really look at those definitions or have someone on your staff do that. I guess like many things in Congress is, if I want something for my district, well, I'll get that money. You just define this district as rural, and all of a sudden you've got some resources coming your way. So I would really look at the USDA, just given the different definitions of rural of what really might work for you. But love to have to be able to answer any questions there. And I think it's real important that as you look and engage with businesses, that we in the business community, particularly at the Black Chamber, we're always working with companies similar to what you are, is in making sure that they're coming to the table with something and that they're coming in a position to be able to leverage the resources that you have. So thank you for recognizing this holiday. I think that that's a great step, and I look forward to taking any questions that you may have for me.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hale. And all of you have made such important points and touched on different things. I think we could be here for many more hours, discussing the issues and brainstorming ideas. And what I find truly exciting about this discussion today is how taking the opportunity to reflect openly and honestly on our history is what provides the pathway to laying a solid foundation for our future. And, just to share a little bit about me, if you tuned into last year's Black History Month celebration, you may or may not know that I am part of a singing group called Halo. In 2015, Halo was the first African-American barbershop quartet, male or female, to compete on an international stage amongst any of the barbershop singing organizations, the earliest of which having been established in 1938. And there are some historical roots there, even to Tulsa. And so, after this experience of being the first, we realized that the milestone was about more than just us as an individual quartet. From there, we were able to establish our nonprofit organization, Halo, whose mission is to connect communities with the art and the history of barbershop singing as being rooted in African-American traditions of music making, and to use this special art form as a tool to support communities in engaging in productive dialogue about racism. And to this end, Halo has been able to partner with educational institutions, faith communities, and recreational organizations in the US and in Canada and the UK via our Race and Real Talk program. And we developed this program, and it functions to both preserve a musical legacy and to bring about meaningful institutional and interpersonal change. And so along those lines, for our final question, as we wrap things up, I would like to invite each of you on the panel to reflect on how in the city of Rockville and in our communities more broadly, how can we preserve African-American heritage, honoring the lessons from history and the memories of those who have made such important contributions so that it will carry on through future generations. And that final question is open to everybody in the panel. I don't know if anyone wants to use the raise hand feature or just
go.
Start with your reflections. Thank you, Councilmember Ashton.
Thank you. I did want to thank Reddy and Mr. Hale for being here. I just want to give a plug that community development and finance institutions have received a lot of funding to help Black-owned businesses. So please do reach out. Because this is the time to move from a movement to a movement. And so I just wanted to plug that there. I am hopeful about our future, and I really do believe that Rockville can be a model on a number of fronts. And I would say I'm proud to help work with these colleagues and all of our staff and our community to make Rockville truly the most inclusive place. As we discussed in our historic preservation, since you specifically asked that question, is we actually dedicated a whole goal to looking at how do we do more to understand our history, to reflect our history, and to tell those untold stories of people who are not necessarily always represented when we talk about American history at the forefront. African American history is American history. There were also peoples before some of the times that we describe in our current history, Native and BIPOC peoples. And so it's about honoring those legacies. I also think we need to be more transparent and make sure that people can see the diaspora faces that have contributed to building the city, to making it what it is. And for young boys and girls who walk into our city hall to see Black excellence and to be able to see that our people too did contribute to making the city great. I know we've talked about seeing how we can do that in City Hall, but I am hopeful that we can get there because representation matters, and people being able to see themselves in history and leadership, that matters. And understanding our history from slavery is important, but it's also to tell those stories of resilience, resistance, and change. And so through our work with historic preservation and in our work in our city to make our city more of a thriving, inclusive city, I hope that we can put that truth to power. I did want to mention that the city of Rockville is creating a book list and have been working with our staff on that. So you'll see books like The Color of Law. You can see mine is tethered here. But just things that will help us understand our history. And it's not just looking back, but it helps you to understand why things are the way they are today. What are the social, economic, health, education, what are those pressures that contribute to some of the symptoms what you see in society, and how we can help to begin to untangle that. We're also going to be launching a social justice survey. And so it's not that the ideas will come from mayor and council and staff, but we want to hear from our community on ways to be inclusive, ways to preserve our history, ways to make our city more just. And I'll just conclude my comments with a quote from James Baldwin that says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And that's why, looking at our history is so important, and it'll help us to help plant the seeds for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ashton. Others, your thoughts on our final question?
I was going to let Councilmember Feinberg go next, but I'm happy to.
I will go after
Whichever
you,
would
that's
like to.
Okay. I want to agree with Councilmember Ashton. It is about being hopeful, because by being hopeful, we, I think, gain the strength to make change and do things that we want to get done. In listening to this conversation today and in things that I was reading in this morning's food section, and they talk about how the 3 major food networks would not allow their food experts speak about the real origin of a lot of the foods that we enjoy, because it would then take it back to how we actually got those foods through people who were brought to this country against their will. And I was flabbergasted, because it was one more thing that I hadn't even thought of, but it's true. And so that, coupled with what we've talked about today, is, I think it stems from fear. People are afraid of that which they don't know. And so that's why a lot of this putting down of others and rules that denigrate others and leave people out has happened. So it kind of reminded me of a quote, and I knew I would mess it up, so I want to just read it. It's by Martin Luther King Jr., and it says, "People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other." So that's something that I think we need to take forward in this whole conversation that we have started as a city. And I do hope that we have a book club. Thank you, Councilmember Ashton, for bringing up the book, The Color of Law. It's the book that I recommended to a group of fellow congregants at the church that we attend. And we've been going through that book for the last 6 months. And I think that's what we have to do together, is find ways to have the tough conversations, make a goal, have success out there of what we see as success, and go forward. And Mr. Hale, I very much hope that you'll continue the partnership with Ready and the city and help us. I believe, and I'm not from Rockville originally, but Rockville is a city that loves our independent small businesses. We love our big businesses, but we really love our small businesses and the entrepreneurial aspect of all of that. So I look forward to working with you in the future. And point of personal privilege, my husband's from Detroit, and I went to high school just north of Pittsburgh and was in Pittsburgh this weekend. So there are lots of things that I think if we just talk to people, we learn all those connections and ways to bridge the gaps going forward. So Niambi, I thank you so much for this conversation. I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel.
So I'm going to jump in and join this conversation. Some of the things that I think about is I'd like to see continuing would be actually creating conversation circles and with different groups, whether it is of course, the African American community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community. There have been many communities now that, unfortunately, due to the polarization in this country, aren't speaking to one another. And I think it piggybacks on that idea of one-on-one conversations, but expanding it to conversation groups or 10 or 12 people. We each have our experiences from our families of origin. I am very grateful to say that I grew up in a family and in a neighborhood in Teaneck, New Jersey, that was the first town to voluntarily have busing so as in order to integrate the schools. And it was right outside of New York City. But I would also say it's what I was taught. And I always think back to the conversation and the musical South Pacific, which celebrates a song, "You've got to be taught to hate and fear. It's going to be drummed in your dear little ear." Although my words may be somewhat paraphrasing it, but the sentiment is there. We need to make sure that what we as leaders, as parents, as friends inculcate with those with whom we interact, that truly hatred has no place here, of any kind of hatred. And what I find fascinating is sometimes there are words and codes that people very unintentionally say or speak, myself included, that don't realize how they may be so hurtful to others. But it's not done with any intention. It's because you may not be familiar with those words or codes, that phrases. There may be things that are said to me unintentionally by some, being Jewish, and not realize how hurtful it is. And I too may have done that and have done that. But by having conversation groups, we can learn from each other on an individual basis. So I am very hopeful. We haven't mentioned also today, it's not something new. This city has a long history of celebrating Martin Luther King Day and the vibrant culture therein of the African American men and women who are here today and before. So we are not only doing new things, but we are sustaining practices that we had from before. And then lastly, the other what that I've thought about is moving forward, a multicultural welcoming center in City Hall would go very far to celebrate all the diversity within our city. And so that says we are welcome to everyone. And I would also like to thank everyone who has not only participated in this, but Channel 11, Niambi, Asmara, Mr. Hale, Cindy Rivard, and everyone who has participated, and of course, my elected colleagues. This has been a wonderful experience, and it kind of reinvigorates us to do even more.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Feinberg. Others, your thoughts? Oh, Mr. Hale, I think you're on mute.
There we go. All right.
Okay, here you are.
Good, good. I not to remember what I said, right? I started to say. Anyway, just echo those comments. I think those are some great practical ideas. And from an education standpoint, what we learn about the history of this culture, who's made contributions to it. Myself, I found the 1619 project in New York Times. I kind of just bookmarked it and go back and read it. I found it, sometimes I would read it and get angry, sometimes I get sad, but it's very educational. It's kind of opened my eyes. And I think what was said earlier about contributions of others, particularly of us here to this country, I think from an educational system, that's a different body. And I understand, limited involvement in local politics. The school system likes the school system, and they want the city to know that it is different. But anyway, sometimes from a curriculum standpoint, one, what's written, but then also specifically some type of culture to this, just to the city, where everything that runs the dynamic from a lynching to the Underground Railroad coming through here to the walking trail, just making that part of the curriculum that the students can experience and other things that were talked about. It's one thing to read about it, it's another thing to walk up, touch it, and see it. And I think that would have a real impact because as you bring the kids in, of course, hopefully you get their parents and older siblings involved as well. So maybe that's something that the school system and the city can kind of collaborate on, practical hands-on learning that they can experience and see in the city that would reflect the background, be it the African American community, Asian community, et cetera, the Native American community that was here before all of us were here. I think perhaps that would go a long way for that. And one other thing, Mayor, you had mentioned food earlier, and I had an interesting conversation. I was actually at a Delta Regional Commission authority in Little Rock, Arkansas, and got in an interesting conversation about food. And the women at the table were arguing. They worked for USDA and other federal agencies about whose shrimp and grits were better. Someone from Georgia said theirs were better, Louisiana versus Arkansas, et cetera. So it always made me think about one uniting factor we all have is food, and the way that the way that different cultures will prepare beef. There's only so many proteins, right? You've got chicken, beef, et cetera, fish, but the many way different cultures will prepare food. I think one way perhaps would be some involvement of food in different cultures, et cetera. There could be some history and some teaching there as well as some good food.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hale.
Mhm.
Yes, and Ms. Picard, please share.
Yes, thank you. So I love this idea of continuing the conversation and the conversation circles. I think that's such an important thing. And I mean, I think in my job, I'm lucky because I do day in and day out get to hear different stories and delve into the research and the histories, and we do our part to try to share that. I did want to mention, Lincoln Park Historical Foundation was not able to be on this call, but they also, are part of sharing that word, and as well as things that are shared through the Lincoln Park Community Center and the history that they share there. That's a really vibrant part of our community that can take part. Another aspect, I think, of African American history, though, here that really should be brought into the conversation and really maybe mined as a resource is the really rich culture and history that takes place in the longstanding African American churches that we have. There's Jerusalem Methodist Episcopal, Clinton AME Church, Mount Calvary Church. Many of these have been around since before the Civil War, just after the Civil War. I know when we did a church tour of churches in Rockville from before the Civil War, one of the organizations, we had both Jerusalem and Clinton Church, and the choir from the Clinton Church dressed in costume and just sang the gospel songs, and every attendee from really that church tour, so many just came back and thanked us because they said, you took us into these places and showed us this history that we just didn't know existed. And I just think that there's a rich resource there. I also know that I just recently got an email that the Christ Episcopal Church is really taking under a year-long study of how they want to present their history and better understand their history and associations with slavery. So I think that, there is an opportunity there. And lastly, I just wanted to pick up on what Council Member Dr. Miles said about the lynchings. There actually were, 2 known lynchings that took place here in Rockville, 3 known in Montgomery County. And the Montgomery County Lynching Memorial Project is a group of citizens that are working also with the county and on a reconciliation and remembrance event, and that is scheduled for here in Rockville the weekend of September 25th and 26th with a walk and a soil collection. And I think that is another real opportunity to share of that important story for the community. And lastly, I think I have to say it as often as I can. I think Rockville has a real exciting story here in Rockville with the Gibbs story and Thurgood Marshall. And I think that it's not as thoroughly understood as it could be. you know, here in our own community was really the first step for pay equality for African American teachers, and helped to bring that to the nation, and an early step on the road to Brown, and a very early win for Thurgood Marshall. And it happened right here at our city. And I think that, you know, that's a really another important story that we should be sharing widely and loudly. In addition to, you know, people like Josiah Henson, who is a remarkable person who resided in Rockville. So if you've not visited the Josiah Henson Museum that just opened just south of Rockville in North Bethesda area, I would say that's someplace that people should consider checking out as we celebrate Juneteenth too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Picard. And Mr. Vardy, do you have any thoughts for the question too, about your ideas about preserving African American heritage?
Well, obviously, we look more towards the future and how to help people build the lives that they want to move towards in their businesses. But we do have a very exciting project, and I would love to get input from all of you to try to spark a mural program over on the Rock East area, which is East Goody area. And our stakeholder committee that's been looking at how we could do that, it has been expressing how important it is to have the murals reflect the history of the place. And I think this will be a great opportunity for us to incorporate some of this preservation of the stories and sense of community.
And these are, you know, wonderful themes that I'm hearing come through. The idea of how do we educate ourselves, whether it be through book club opportunities, whether it be through community conversations and self-study, or, you know, formal education in the public school system. And really digging deep into the rich history that is here in the city of Rockville and in Montgomery County in the state of Maryland, as it pertains to African American heritage. And certainly Councilmember Feinberg and Ms. Picard and Mr. Vardy, you're speaking my language when you touch on specifically the arts, the use of the arts to preserve history and continue to tell the stories that we need to remember about ourselves. Earlier, I shared with you how my group Halo is using music as its power of now to be an agent of change. So let's wrap up today's powerful discussion with a musical sample from Halo. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to all of today's panelists. And I'll cut a rug till I'm slung in a jug, a slice of onion and a raw one. You can find out more about Juneteenth activities happening in Rockville by heading to RockvilleMD.gov/Juneteenth. And on behalf of the Rockville Mayor and Council and the City of Rockville, I'm Niambi Powell. Thanks for joining us.